This video is an introduction to the military metaphor, and I need to distinguish this video from the next one, which will explain how to use the textbook Art of Design. So first, dealing with the military metaphor, I need to encourage you to think about the discussion of strategy in this class in terms of the discussion of war and operations and that sort of thing, really as a metaphor that can be applied in a number of different contexts. It can be applied in healthcare, where the goal is different. Instead of trying to win a battle, the goal is the care of the patient. And so there is limited time, limited resources, limited capacities. There are certain skills that have to be brought to bear in a certain situation. And so in healthcare, strategy is still involved, although the goal is different. And in fact, one of the problems facing healthcare providers is that there is a problem with assessing the cost of resources. And this has to do with insurance and how patients don't know necessarily how much a procedure costs that a doctor is ordering, right? That information left from the system, if we were to think of it in military terms, you know, if you were to enter into an operation where you didn't know the cost of the operation, what's going to happen if you have unlimited funds? Well, probably something similar to what happened in the Second Gulf War, where the metric that was being used to understand whether they were winning was whether the generals were spending all of the money that was allocated to them. Now, you've never heard that before, but that's the case. That as this complex operational environment was unfolding, the generals involved, because things were happening so fast, and the commanders underneath, they were given budgets, and so they were trying to make sure that they had spent all of their money so that they were demonstrating that they were making progress. And I know that because, you know, I heard it from, you know, from people there. This is how things were being handled behind closed doors where they were planning. And it wasn't because they were trying to do this sort of thing, but things were just happening so fast. What metric do you use to understand whether you're succeeding? Well, you are executing certain operations, but you're also spending money, and are you actually spending at the time that you're supposed to be? Well, that same sort of problem can occur in the medical field. It can happen in business too. It can happen in government policy making, where government offices have budgets that they have to keep. And how do they know if they're succeeding? Well, if they're actually spending the money that they receive, because that's their lifeblood, right? Well, my point in this is that strategy opens, understanding these principles of how to deal with complex systems, open knowledge of the system, new kinds of knowledge that I think will be very helpful for you in solving complex organizational problems. So I'm describing to you the use of the military metaphor, and I'm applying it I've just applied it to healthcare, but you can also see how it applies in business, right? It's no secret that there are many books written about how business involves thinking strategically and operating in competition. But what I want to address right now is a certain philosophy of how to approach complexity. If you read the complexity literature, there's an emphasis on not being able to predict complex phenomena as they occur, right? There are things that just simply happen and you can't predict them. You can be more prepared for them, but you can't predict them. And so sometimes you can't predict them. And so there's this emphasis in complexity study of understanding emergence and being able to observe the emerging that's going on and then there is a caricature that is made through some approaches to multiculturalism in which it is thought that it's a Western way of thinking to address these problems strategically, to think about goals, to think about victory, and so on. Now, while diversity is a helpful way of thinking, and certainly we should appreciate people coming from different diverse perspectives and respect them and so on. In dealing with complex problems, we are talking about engaging with other people on a level where a problem generally is outside of us, potentially outside of a person we're engaged with. It could be in an organization. But however this problem exists, as we join in interaction with other people, we don't necessarily have the chance to simply solve problems through feeling empathy and thinking positively about the other people that we're engaged with. In a global environment, for instance, various nations are in competition with other nations, and different global companies are in competition with other companies, in which there really is competition. There really are resources which companies are fighting over, or countries are wrestling to try to lay claim to. If we look at those types of competition or those types of problems as merely arising out of, simply rising out of diversity, or that there are just many legitimate diverse ways of thinking about these problems and they're all equally the same and we all equally need to embrace them all, what we lose in thinking that way is what the obvious facts of history reveal in diverse environments and diverse situations throughout the history of the world. So I'd like to make a case based on a diverse respect for environments and histories all throughout the world, that strategy is universal. That wisdom regarding dealing with complex systems and the value of it is universal, and you need to be very careful in this course with not looking. You don't want to be looking at the wisdom that the various readings and principles that are shared in this course. The wisdom in this course, you don't want to become prejudiced toward this counsel, the prudence in the course, simply because the goal is to actually think through and solve dealing with complex problems. If you do that, I think you take a philosophy of diversity and empathy and misplace it. If anything, the international conflicts that have occurred throughout history are evidence that there is a kind of universal language of strategic principles. And whether you are in China and your name is Sun Tzu, or whether you are in Japan and you're Miyamoto Musashi, whichever various country you are from, whatever culture, whether you are Karl von Clausewitz and you are writing his textbook on war, whatever the case is, throughout the history of the world, it is clear that these same principles have shown up again and again and again, perhaps with new nuances, new insights based on the various cultural perspectives of different nations. But let the diversity of wisdom about these principles guide you to a deeper understanding of them, rather than characterizing them and characterizing strategic thinking as simply some sort of Western idea that that should be let go of. Do not allow prejudice against Western civilization to lead you to mischaracterize the principles of strategy.